Welcome to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. Hope you're having a great day. Hope you had a great weekend. And no big sayings or stories to tell this morning. We're going to shift right into our guest today, someone who I really enjoy catching up with. And I forgot to look back and see when was the last time I talked to Julian Rankin, who's the executive director of the Walter Anderson Museum of Art. But it's been a while after he and I pretty much stayed in touch with each other, at least every couple of months. So I'm looking forward to finding out the latest. Without any further ado, let me bring my friend Julian Rankin into the conversation. And first of all, just say good morning. How you doing, Julian?
Well, it's a beautiful morning here on the coast.
It really is. It really is. Man, it's good. It's just good to see you. So, man, oh, man. The Walter Anderson Museum continues to be part of the conversation in so many different ways, and we'll get an update about that. You've got the New Springs Hotel next to you, and I had Jessica and Joe Cloyd on recently, and we told the great story of what I called an archaeological dig. So when you go in and take an old building like that and transform it the way they did, sometimes it's just easier to tear it down and start over. But their commitment and most of their construction projects has been to keep the uniqueness of the architecture that was there before and bring it along. But it's great to have a neighbor like that, isn't it?
It is. And, I think what you're saying is part of why those, that hotel specifically, but all the development in that vein is so important, is that new construction is great, of course, but if you're dealing with a story, whether that's an architectural story or a site or a community, whatever that looks like in terms of the finished product, you do need to be aware of the value of that. And I think in their case, it's such an amazing structure. And when people see it, they're drawn to it. And that's the case, with so many examples in coastal Mississippi. And it's not always the architecture. It could just be the earth itself or the landscape or the sea. But, knowing that there's a wealth of stories underneath us that can really be, especially in economic development, a driver and an anchor.
Wes, it's got to be one of the big pluses of coastal Mississippi. And you and I have chatted about this. You've made a career understanding that how the landscapes often define us. I mean, we're a coastal community, but there's so much about this place that is special. And to the extent that we can preserve that as we continue to grow and continue to do things that enhance the quality of life here in coastal Mississippi, it's important. I mentioned this on my conversation with Joe and Jessica. But Joe worked very closely with me after Hurricane Katrina. In fact, at the time, he's working for Governor Barbour. And his team, Governor Barbour's team, actually worked out of the conference room, my conference room at the Sun Herald, for over a year. So I got to know a lot of the people on his team really well. And Joe was one of them. And we also got to know Andreas Juani, who is a famed architect and planner from the University of Miami. He's the father of new urbanism, written books about it. He does consulting around this topic all around the world. And, one of the things he said after Hurricane Katrina that you can appreciate, and maybe I've mentioned this to you before, but he said, listen, so much of the architecture that defines this community, that gives it its sense of place, has been destroyed by the storm. And he said, if you have a column still standing, rebuild that structure. And he was just, and one of the things they did actually, after we had the charrettes 5 weeks after the storm, where we did all this sort of architectural planning and trying to understand the infrastructure needs that were going to be here as a result of the storm, that we could then inform the governor so he could go to the U.S. Congress and ask for what were tens of billions of dollars to help us with the recovery effort. But one of the things that Andreas Juani helped us really appreciate is that the sense of place that makes coastal Mississippi so special, capturing the historical architecture in books. In fact, they did that, showing with each community, here are the design characteristics that define what was the architectural renderings of coastal Mississippi, how we handled things, capturing that in a book so people could use that as a guide as they rebuild stuff. But he was super serious about that there was those attributes that defined us, and we can't lose that. If we lose that, then we lose the thing that made this place so special. The good thing about Ocean Springs, incidentally, was, other than the beach community of Ocean Springs, while it sustained a lot of damage, the character of that place, especially downtown, was not lost in the storm. And you guys have been able to build off of that, but there's still that awareness that we if we can keep it, let's keep it, so that we don't lose the essence of it. That's really important for a community to have those conversations, isn't it?
It is, and it's a difficult thing too. There is this balance between retaining the past but activating it and making it useful to the future, and progress is never stopping. Change is hard. I was listening to someone, another thinker the other day, and talking about architecture, and we think about, and this is a global paradigm here, but that architecture of the past, they don't make them like they used to. If you go back and look at the time, often at that contemporaneous moment, they were bemoaning this architecture that we find historic. So there's always this frame of reference, this perspective that's important to keep in mind. But in terms of the history, again, whether that's architectural or otherwise, it's great to have those in a book, those resources, but the real magic happens when you can apply those to whatever challenge is at your doorstep today. And I think that is a great reminder that reinventing the wheel, as they say, it's just so much more work. And so the efficiency of looking back, and even if you decide to depart from something, and in historic preservation, that's often what they say: if you're going to add on, make it noticeably different. And it's good to have these two or three or four or five different ideas and times and places kind of commingling. But the idea of trying to repeat or build off what people have done before, there's so many great thinkers, and in nature itself, so I think finding inspiration is really, for us all here on coastal Mississippi's, shores, it's the real advantage we have, because we have such a diversity of landscape and thinkers and culture. And that to me is the real engine of the authentic experience that people who come here want to find. And if there doesn't have to be, everything in its exact state as it always was, but that original object is a talisman of that history, that past. And then when you get the contemporary people, whether those are artists or creators or architects or entrepreneurs, to then do something, it's not in isolation. And I think the greatest example in Ocean Springs, which of course our topography is sheltered a little bit from Katrina, we're on a little bit of a hill when you think about downtown, but I was just walking in the rain yesterday, and I was fascinated by the fact that, I wasn't getting so wet because this live oak canopy above me. And that's something that's easy to forget. But without that, this place is such a different, landscape. And so we have to remember that that's really the rooted quality of our surroundings. That's what makes it special.
It is. You think about how resilient we are as a people, and you think of sort of the symbol of resilience that the live oak represents. I mean, Lord have mercy. That, whether it be droughts or hurricanes or whatever, you name it, they've been challenged by it, and their ability to bounce back is very symbolic of what we are as a people, and in that way we peacefully coexist. That's kind of the terrific story that we tell. But what's interesting, you and I talk about this a lot, but I think if you think about the Walter Anderson Museum, first of all, Walter Anderson himself, this world traveler, this Renaissance man, so to speak, and the way he captured the essence of this landscape that is coastal Mississippi, and the way that he's inspired us through capturing that, it gives us appreciation for what that is, not just his art, but it gives us an appreciation for what he's captured. When you combine the role that the museum plays to sort of put him out there to say, let's continue to get inspired by him, but then the other artists that you're able to bring in. So that's sort of the internal mission. And then you think about the role that you and others are playing in your external communication, whether it be working on art projects in downtown Pascagoula, or whether it be working with Joe and a number of neighbors on how you might transform the block that you're in. But this community building part, that what you're doing, your goal is to hit on a lot of cylinders. Is to push the best of what Walter Anderson could provide us in terms of inspiration, and whether it be internally for people who visit the museum, or that the essence of that in the conversations you're having on your block. That's what Walter Anderson Museum is all about, isn't it?
It should be, and it always has been. I think as we build upon, the decades that preceded us, it just gives us an opportunity to add our own flavor to it. But, Anderson's own, family crest was the live oak, and it talked about standing sure. So standing stand sure was their motto. And, that's important, but likewise, like you're saying, he also talked about nature's perpetual rebirth and innovation and it being the true fountain of youth. So, we have a more youthful staff here than, many museums across the state. So we've leaned into that. Although the longer I'm here, I'm like, I'm getting older too. It's been a while. The years keep flying by. But to your point, I think pushing out beyond, our walls is also part of that mission. And so we've talked about our campus expansion that's ongoing, but really going out and helping communities, municipalities with public art. We're actually working with Ocean Springs now as well. They've expressed, a desire and have a plan to do some gateway sculptures here in the next year or so. So we're working with them and the community to think about what those symbols could be, that visual language that welcomes people, across the bridge and signals that, that community feel. So it really is, about activating, like we talked about the past. And it's really something that I think can be the sustaining engine of this museum in the future.
Well, people, when they serendipitously, whether they're getting sucked off Highway 90 or I-10, that end up in Ocean Springs, they have a feeling immediately that they're in somewhere, a place that's special. Anything that you can do through art and otherwise to enhance that is only going to be great for the city and good for coastal Mississippi. Hey, when we come back on the other side, we'll continue our conversation with Julian Rankin from the Walter Anderson Museum of Art. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. I have someone that I really enjoy spending time with. I shared that during the break, but Julian Rankin, who has a way with words. He's known to have a way with words and vision for coastal Mississippi, from the Walter Anderson Museum of Art. I'm curious about this. Do you ever get used to Walter Anderson and what you've learned about him? Do you ever get used to it, or is it a world where you just keep looking in that little nook and cranny over there and you find more inspiration? Where are you as it relates to Walter Anderson and your ability to be inspired by him?
It's been interesting. Certainly there's never a full awareness because he's not here with us, for one, but also, there's so many books that have been written and, I've read many of them, but I haven't read every word, even of his own writings. There's actually a new publication by the same team who brought the new documentary a couple of years ago, the regional Emmy Award-winning documentary. They're bringing his bicycle logs. So these were the log books that he kept on his bicycle journeys. Many people know about the Horn Island logs, but he also traveled thousands of miles across the U.S. And when he would go abroad, he'd always get a bicycle. And so there's always more to discover. And the family, they have such a wealth of artwork and knowledge. But the other cool thing about Anderson is that he was a myth maker, even in his own time. He was aware that the things he was doing were spectacular. And I think he was, in some ways, orchestrating that too, because he was fascinated with global myth and legend. But then you can imagine if you're escaping an institution and mental institution and going down on bed sheets and doing a mural on the side of the building as you go, or walking home to Ocean Springs from Maryland, these things he would do, like Odysseus going out to the islands, he was aware of that. And so as stewards of that story, we get to play around with that a little bit and create. He's given us permission to continue to create that myth. Not to say it's not true, but it's this notion that every story, when it's told again, just like a folk tale, is told differently. And I think that's the magic of these archetypal narratives that he was fascinated with, but also that we think about, the game of telephone of your grandmother telling your mother and her telling you and on down, or a passed down recipe. You get to make little tweaks to it and build upon it. And so we get to do that in real time and also discover scholarship that, hasn't been illuminated for us before. So it's a multi-tiered conversation with Anderson, with the community, and across time.
Yeah, it's cool the way you said that. He was kind of in the business of myth making. Some of it he was incredibly aware of, and some maybe he wasn't aware of. But when you add it all up, there's a lot of mystery. There's a lot of mystery about where his inspirations came from. We have a sense of a lot of it because he's written a lot about it. I can't wait to see the bicycle logs. Speaking of the documentary, it's been seen literally all over the country. And the book has been incredibly popular. I think they did such a good job on that. But when you think about the documentary in and of itself and the fact that it's run on public broadcasting across the nation, do you find people who walk in who can cite that to you that are from the hinterlands and you're like, wow, the inspiration that documentary gave that caused someone to actually pass through this town and come here and share that they were inspired by it? In much the way sort of the New York art community got enthralled by George Orr. I've estimated, and you've discussed this before, that the documentary would create the same kind of interest in Walter Anderson. Do you see that evolving in that way?
Yeah, I mean, and it builds upon, other moments when, in the early aughts, when he had a Smithsonian show in DC when Anderson did. So there are these ebbs and flows and continued trajectory going upward. But so to your point, the documentary definitely, the engagement even digitally and people, buying artworks or, souvenirs, knowing about Anderson. But then people come in and they're also aware of it. And just like they're aware of his work from Hometown on HGTV, when they put the prints in many of the interiors of their houses. But there is always more. And I think Rick Rubin, who was the, famed music producer of the Beastie Boys and others, he was talking the other day about, this idea of the outcome, being something we can't control. It's all about the process. And Anderson was aware of that too. This creative act, you do the best you can, you put things forward. And then what happens after it leaves your hands or your mouth or what have you is out of your control, and the fates will decide. So I think a lot of that is, what will happen, but the organic kind of building of engagement and awareness is going to continue to grow for Anderson, because it started by his own doing at a place that was suppressed. I mean, he shirked the spotlight when he had the opportunity to do it. And so people have been able to discover it again and again. People like to find it for themselves. So I think as folks, they're always writing a story about Walter. There's always something else coming out. And even with University Press of Mississippi, who's published so many books over the years, a lot of those are out of print. So we've got an initiative with them that are bringing some of those back. And one of the ones we're working on this year is actually Anderson's Alice in Wonderland. So he illustrated Alice in Wonderland just like he did many other pieces of Western canon. And so that'll be coming back out. And so that hadn't been published and around since the late 80s. And so this is always a way that people can get back into the story. And I think it's part of the magic of the journey.
Hey, I have an interesting place to go that we haven't talked about before. I had the opportunity to have a show with George Schlogel, a couple of shows with George Schlogel, one actually just a few weeks before he unfortunately died. And along the way, I asked him, and we were able to capture this. I asked him, how does he want to be remembered? And he says, I don't want to be remembered. He said, I just want the things that I'm involved in to continue. And if my involvement in those things lead to something that causes someone who may go away to school to come back here, or someone who may have to pursue his career in another place and then eventually come back here, if I was involved in that, whether my name was associated with it or not, that's what I want. And I think he really meant it, and I've shared that many times on the show. I was struck recently, I saw a video of someone that was talking about legacy. They were talking about what is legacy. And one of the things he did is he took this long rope. The rope was, I'm just guessing 50 feet long. It was a very, very long rope. And at the end of the rope, the very end, maybe a half an inch, was a piece of red tape. And what the red tape represented was the time that we're here on Earth, and the rope represented all of human history, what we know about. And it was really sort of trying to help us understand that we're here for such a short, the scheme of things and perspective, we're here for such a short period of time. What is our mark going to be? What is it that we're going to leave behind? What does that look like? How often do you think about that? How often do you think about legacy and art and even the role that you're playing and the legacy that you will leave? The people that you engage with on your board are people who contribute to the museum and the legacy they talk about. How often do you think about things like that?
I think it's part of the nature of dealing with an artist like Walter Anderson. So I think about it a lot in terms of other people and the legacy we've inherited. Personally, I've as a younger person, you want to make your mark, and I think as now I'm kind of mid-career, and as you get a little older, I'm sure this is the case. But some folks are still interested in legacy, and that's an important thing. But others, and I think I'm less interested in the legacy that is external and more, like you're saying, within a community. We actually did a project, where we gathered oral histories from folks across the coast a couple of years ago, and there were people talking about this. They were interviewing their elders, And one guy specifically, was saying that, he didn't care if he was remembered. He just wanted his, his children and, grandchildren to know that he'd, been a good man in his community. And so I think that the idea of legacy can get overblown, and it can be sort of a, chasing this dragon of, will I be remembered? When we go, we don't know what happens to us. You can't take this stuff with you. So in some ways, the legacy, in my perspective, it's about championing and upholding the legacies that others have left. What happens when I'm gone or when we're gone, that's the job of whoever follows. So I think to that point earlier about the results of what we're doing, I think ultimately if we can do good while we're here, then the stories that are told about us, those will be told, but they're beyond our control. And that's part of the fun of it, I think. As long as we, you don't do it for the accolades come, because of the good work you do. And I think about my children more than I had before. And it's really not about any kind of spotlight. It's just about, showing up and doing the work, wherever that takes us. But I do think legacy is extremely important, obviously. And the people that we remember, that they're remembered for what they gave or what they did. But I think for me personally, my legacy is not my business. It's going to be left up to whoever, comes behind me. But I do hope that I can instill, whether it's in my children or in the work that I was a part of, some element of success or positivity that others can benefit from.
I think I've thought about it a lot. I mean, Ann once said to me that when I first started doing this show, she says, people are not going to even remember that you were the publisher of the Sun Herald. It's like we go through these chapters in our lives, and why I think the Sun Herald was recognized with a Pulitzer Prize and other awards after Hurricane Katrina, the memory of the role that the Sun Herald played in helping the recovery effort in coastal Mississippi will fade. The fights that we fought over, say, the Ocean Springs Bridge, for example, the role that we played in helping to bring gaming inland and on and on, all those things kind of fade. I think the older I get, the more I think about what George said is true. That at the end of the day, they may not remember George Schlegel, and he was okay with that. But they'll remember, though, the things that he left behind, and his name may not even be associated with that. But that I think there's a lot powerful in that, and you're the point that you make that we won't have any control over it anyway. I mean, the people around us are the ones who control it. I see it in my kids and my kids' kids. That part of my legacy is more important today than it ever was before. That you'll see me and my wife Ann through our kids and our kids' kids and their kids as life goes on. Interesting part of the conversation. Hey, when we come back on the other side, I'm curious about what Walter Anderson would think of his legacy today. I think it's amazing, actually. We'll continue our conversation with Julian when we get on the other side. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. I have my friend Julian Rankin with us from the Walter Anderson Museum of Art. And when we went to break, we were just kind of talking a little bit about legacy. Julian, when we have conversations like that, that's when I find I get the most feedback. Anything that causes someone to think about things, maybe themselves, really. I get feedback under those circumstances, and I really enjoy the engagement around that. I would be curious what your thoughts would be. Walter Anderson, this myth maker, as you referred to him, I wonder if he'd be blown away by what's been made of him and his after his death.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting because for many people who look at Anderson, they would say he probably wouldn't want to have had a museum in his name. And you look at some of the watercolors he painted, which were burned by himself to start a fire on the island, or discarded in some fashion, and really meant as a process-based work. I do wonder what he would think. I mean, he could just as soon be blown away and excited, or just turn his head and ride his bicycle down the street, but I do think in spirit, in terms of, what he represents, which is, this artist who wanted to investigate what it meant to be human, to try to leave a mark, even if he wasn't so interested in the fame portion of it. The idea that he was inspired by the cave paintings, this notion that humans just want to leave their handprints on the wall. I was here. I think in that way, he would be pleased to know that there is a museum still standing, and then the community has risen up around it. I mean, he's got, his great grandson, Matt Stebley, who's a tattoo artist in town. Of course, all the other artists we know, the Shearwater pottery example of being around for almost 100 years. But, if he came to the museum now, I think he would be pleased to see the interpretation and the connections that we make, the contemporary artists who we position alongside him, but also the community conversations we're able to have. Because so often, even pre-internet, he died in 1965, pre a lot of things, but his philosophies are very prescient in that they want us to kind of break free sometimes of the busyness that can consume us. And remember that we are creatures and humans and beings that are looking for something more. We're aware of our own existence. It's a thing that not many animals on Earth have, and that, we don't necessarily need to always be locked into, the rote 9 to 5 that we have to do to pay the bills. But there's to break free when we can. I think he would be pleased to know that the campus here and that the work we're doing is trying to get students and people of all ages to break free from that a little bit and to connect with that, that more spiritual part of themselves that's connected to everybody else.
I think so. I think you're probably, I love the way you say that. And in that way, there's a higher calling that comes from the inspiration from his work. He probably wouldn't be thrilled by the commercialization of it, but that's what it takes. If you're going to be a successful museum, you have to have a successful commercialization of that. But you think about the Anderson family in general. I've got Anderson pottery here at the house. I've got a Stebley painting in our bathroom. I've got a Walter Anderson in one of our guest bedrooms. There's so many coastal Mississippians and really people across America that could say the same thing, that they've been inspired. And every time they look at it, they're touched by the uniqueness of it and the approach that they took. But I love the way you say it, and I think that all of that is true. Man, what in the world's going on in your world these days? I bet it's just busy, busy, busy as usual.
It is. We've been talking about, like I mentioned earlier, the museum's expanding its campus, and we've been working our way through grant agreements and getting that rolling. There's a big project that's been many years in the making called the Creative Complex, which is across the street from the museum. But more recently, we've developed a concept for another property right behind the museum, and this is connected to our existing gardens. It's an old 100-year-old house, a commercially zoned property that we've come into possession of, and we have a concept that does not raise the house, as we've talked about. It does not tear it down. It leans into that history. And it's going to be the site of what's called the Traveler, which is inspired by Anderson's global travels and his returns home, where he always brought back inspiration, but he wanted to stay rooted here. And it'll have a restaurant, gardens. And the really cool thing, though, is that it'll be interpreted inside with murals and contemporary art and furniture that's made after Anderson designs and Anderson motifs that really leans into this mid-century shearwater pottery aesthetic, and in some ways gives people an immersive experience where they can drink from shearwater pottery. They can sit in a pelican chair that Anderson designed that might be made by a career tech carpentry student in our high schools here on the coast. And so that's our project now that we're about to break ground on here in a matter of weeks, and that's funded through the Mississippi Arts Commission's Building Fund for the Arts. So we have two campus expansions that are really ramping up at the same time, 2 sites. And meanwhile, trying to do, the good work that we've talked about across the coast. So it is busy, very busy, and bureaucracy is good, but it's also, it's a lot to keep track of. So, we've grown our capacity to do that. And we're excited to finally, be seeing some things going vertical and start to prepare this for the public.
So you and I had a show with Chef Nick Wallace, who you have prior experience with up in Jackson. Terrific show. I've had a show just with him. And then, of course, you and I have had him together on this show. What's the latest in your collaboration with Nick?
So at the Traveler, it'll house a restaurant that is in partnership with Nick Wallace. And for those who don't know Nick, he's got a restaurant at 2 Mississippi museums, the Civil Rights and History museums there. He used to work at the Mississippi Museum of Art and had a restaurant there, but he's been on, Top Chef, Chop, Champions, all these different TV shows. And he's from Mississippi. He grew up, both in an agricultural setting outside of Edwards, Mississippi, and also in Jackson. So he's got this urban and rural. And he and I and the museum have developed a concept called Hen and Egg, which in some ways pays homage to his own matriarchs and his family who, kind of shepherded and cultivated his love for cooking. But it also actually references Anderson. Anderson talked about, the force of life must find expression in the egg. This idea of the egg is like a symbol of not just breakfast, but of birth and rebirth and, new ideas. And so this will be a breakfast and lunch, specialty dinners, but really breakfast and lunch heavy spot at the Traveler. And so I think it's going to be a really good opportunity for us to give people another way to, taste, in this case, the cultural story that Anderson talks about, everything that grows from the earth. You can see it on the walls, you can see the native flora in our gardens, but to be able to taste it, to sit around a shared table, it's really going to add to the experience that people have here. And it'll serve the growing downtown district here, which includes Springs Hotel and some other developments. So I think it's a great collaboration, cross-sector collaboration on many fronts, and should really be something that people enjoy and can just spend time with each other.
What's the opening date projected to be?
So we're trying to construction should be done here in the calendar year. So I would say early 25 in kind of a realistic timeline of being open and ready to serve. But it's, like I said, it's happening here. We've got our plans, our contractor, getting our permits pulled and all that. And it's going to be, construction's happening in the next couple of weeks and continues through the summer. And so as folks come by, they'll see it moving fast and furious.
That's really, really good stuff. I look forward to seeing it. I hadn't been. I had to come over and visit with you. We'll have to kind of walk through that part of the expanded campus, and maybe we'll plan lunch with Joe one day and sit down and just kind of reminisce about the progress that's been made there and talk about the progress that's coming. It's exciting. But Haley Barbour used to say this after Hurricane Katrina, that the government can help you get back on your knees, but it's private enterprise that's going to help you get back on your feet. And the role that private investors are playing right now in a town like Ocean Springs, man, it's incredible. I mean, you have to look around the new restaurant development, the mixed use that's coming, and the specialty hotels like the Springs that is continuing to be built. It's exciting to see people with the funds, with the ability to invest in that city, being inspired by that city, and as I say, betting the ranch. But it's happening, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And, I think, like you're saying, you have to have skin in the game. And, we're fortunate to have a place where people want to invest their money all across the coast. But I would, too, just from the museum perspective, certainly. And also a lot of these projects, you have to look back and thank the legislature and the public part of it, too, because the Gulf Coast Restoration Fund, of course, is a primary example. But to be able to help private enterprise get another leg up to speed up some of this development. Our coast delegation has, such a working relationship. They're so powerful, in Jackson, but they're just good people, and they understand, there's trusted relationships within every municipality, every county. And so I think it's so incumbent upon us all to be collaborative and honest about what we're trying to do. There's so much smoke and mirrors in our world. And so when we can really say, we have money to put here, we have an idea, we want to make progress happen. Sometimes that's an ask of the legislature. Sometimes that's, a private investor. Sometimes it's just, trying to find someone who has an ear towards a good idea. And then you wanted to let them know what you're bringing to their community so that they know that you have good intentions, because development can be scary. So I think all those things, while it's difficult to thread the needle, collaboration can be hard. That to me is where the magic always happens. We can't do anything in isolation. And I think we're seeing a lot of this being the result of smart people who are aligning their goals and trying to make something happen. Yeah,
it is really exciting. You think about the mayors of the various cities of Jackson County get together quarterly and share with each other and help each other. You think about the Jackson County Board of Supervisors who gets it. And I mean, there's a lot of aligning to do, a lot of communicating to do. I mean, that's one of the complicated things about coastal Mississippi. But at the same time, when you do it well, you can really enjoy the fruits of that communication effort. That is for sure. Hey, when we come back on the other side, we'll have a final segment with Julian. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. Julian, one of the things I enjoy is when I'm talking with, say, Mayor Kenny Holloway, and he's talking about the need for progress in the city. Always, it seems that always the Walter Anderson Museum comes up somewhere in those conversations. And when I'm talking to the Ocean Springs Chamber or the Jackson County Chamber working with Paige, the Walter Anderson Museum comes up in those conversations. Do you feel like you've done a good job integrating?
Yeah, and I mean, it's not anything really. I mean, it's strategic, but it wasn't anything planned. When I came here, certainly, I was. This is 6 years ago now, but needing people to open doors, make introductions, show me what it was like down here, how things worked. And then we just found opportunities to help push different initiatives and ideas forward that were beneficial not just to us, but to the communities. And I love brainstorming and trying to figure out where overlap is and where efficiencies lie and how we can activate something for the good of multiple entities. And so, it's not Machiavellian at all. We're not trying to take over, by any means. And we're just trying to take care of our own little postage stamp here. But the great thing about the connectivity of the Anderson story is that his writings, his art, it pushes us out into nature, into the community. And then you find people who you want to collaborate with or who need something, or you need something from them, and you figure out how we can work together. And that goes back, you think about the murals that Anderson painted of, indigenous societies and modern Ocean Springs, and this idea of community being a theme of it. And you just go back to that. We're all around the fire together. Ultimately, there's opportunity for us to do something, special. And so I really do love, cultivating partnerships with folks and just figuring out how we can lend the name or the brand or some thought partnership to help something happen, because it's best for all of us if we can work together.
People ask me where my sense of community came from, and I always give Roland Weeks a lot of credit, because as I was growing up at the Sun Herald, and he gave me big responsibility when I was in my 20s. I look back on it now and think he needed his head examined. But the fact is, he saw something in me before I saw it in myself, and he mentored me and worked with me. And one of the things he often said to me was this, that to be a good publisher, to be a great publisher, you have the fiduciary responsibilities that goes with running a company. So, profit and financial success is the thing that fuels our ability to practice the First Amendment. So we've got to have a really strong company. The second thing is you have a First Amendment responsibility. So there's the journalistic mission of the newspaper and the editorial voice that I controlled as a publisher. You have that, and you have to take that seriously. And that takes time, and you can't short circuit understanding what the needs of the community are, et cetera. But he said there's also a third hat, and that is the community leader hat. And he always strongly encouraged me to be involved in various organizations, to be on boards, to volunteer my time, to, as John Harrison says, flex muscles. And then by doing that, you'll learn the interconnectedness of the community and the people who are involved in the community, the volunteers, the volunteer leaders who are involved. But he said oftentimes those hats, the fiduciary hat, the business hat, the editorial hat, and then the community hat, are going to be at conflict with one another. That's inherent in the responsibilities you have as a publisher. But to the extent that you can manage those conflicts will make you a better publisher. Now, I could actually say that about any business leader on the coast, aside from the journalistic piece of that. Take that out for a second. But the extent to which they can lead their companies to be more responsive to the community, or maybe more importantly, in a way they can give back to the community, that by being engaged in the community, they can actually have a stronger business because they understand the community better. When you're doing your work, you see a lot of leaders that get that part, don't you?
I do. And I mean, obviously we have, you've talked about the philanthropic side of that, nonprofits across the coast are great recipients of that. And, I think that it's a challenge often because the alignments, the motivations, you have to have incentives aligned properly, in order to make that happen and work. And it's really difficult in a museum sometimes to have that two sides of your brain working when, something that may quote unquote make you money, versus a thing that is about the preservation of the object, or something that, without which you can't do any of the work you're doing. And it's a lot of that is just a practical thing of writing a grant versus maybe spending some time with a school group that's coming in. But, ultimately, if you're not serving the person at your, if you're a bank teller, the individual there who's, transacting with you, or, the person who comes in your door, or the community that's supporting you, on the long term, your profits will fade. And so I think it's important, and I see this all over the coast, like you're saying, for people to take the time out of their busy days, and our board is a great example, to be volunteers, to lend their expertise, because ultimately that does come back around, and there'll be a time when we all need somebody else to stop over on the side of the road, help us with our bicycle tire or what have you. So, but it is a challenge, and I would tell, back to your point earlier, the young people who are coming up in coastal Mississippi, even if they don't see it in themselves, y'all obviously are going to be the future. But not only that is, the homegrown aspects of this place, will generate competition, that can be taken all over the world. You don't have to stay here, but you're as good as anybody else. And that's what I think we want to try to do as leaders and businesses and nonprofits, is to show students they have that potential.
I agree completely. We should get together more often. I enjoy conversations with you are stimulating for me, and I bet our listeners as well. It's been a great to visit with you, Julian Rankin. Have a great day, my friend.
Thanks.
You bet. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a good day, and take care.